Last year, a top FBI official told Congress it believed one of its agents, Garrett O'Boyle, was the suspected leaker in a Project Veritas video on the Bureau targeting domestic news media organizations, leading to calls for a criminal investigation into the alleged leaker.
You've been a special agent for a number of years.
Correct.
Special agent with the FBI.
That's correct. I've worked in counterintelligence, counterterrorism. I've worked criminal.
But there was a problem because the FBI got the wrong guy. So joining us now is Steve Baker, Blaze Media investigative reporter, and Kyle Seraphin, a former FBI agent and whistleblower, who says that he was the one in the Project Veritas video, not O'Boyle. So Kyle, let's start with you. Give us a little bit of your background and what happened with this interview.
Sure. So I worked for the FBI from 2016 until I was unceremoniously removed from duty in April of 2022. That interview went live in May after they pulled my paycheck and my gun and my authorities and apparently any responsibilities I had to the FBI. But they decided to go after my buddy, and they suspended him in September of 2022 for something that we all knew, we being the folks inside my little group of whistleblowers, knew that I had done. So it was pretty obvious the FBI also should have known. In fact, I released an affidavit to the FBI and to members of Congress the day after they suspended Garrett saying, look, this was me. You know, they should have asked me about it. We redacted my name, but it was sent through a whistleblower attorney, so they should have at least done a more thorough investigation. We know they didn't.
So why do you think that they had Garrett accused and named and not going through this full investigation?
So the FBI is an interesting organization. It's kind of like a fraternity. And it's in that way, the biggest sin you can commit is not breaking the law. It's actually embarrassing the FBI. And when you go forward and blow the whistle on the FBI's wrongdoings, you are what we call PNG'd in the intelligence world, which is persona non gratis. They will kick you out, but they will come after you with everything they have. So they'd already gotten me out. They'd taken my badge, my gun, my paycheck, my family lost our home. We had to move. Garrett was still in. Garrett was one of the people that also had done whistleblowing activity. So he had engaged in the one thing that you're not allowed to do, tell the FBI they did it wrong. So they went after him next.
So both you and Garrett are in what would be referred to as permanently suspended status, or I'm not exactly sure how to characterize that, but I do have one question. What kind of jeopardy are you guys in at all? Is there any remaining jeopardy, legal or otherwise?
So Garrett's family is without pay and has been since that time, since September of 22. I actually had to, quote unquote, resign after not being paid for my job that I worked at, but I wasn't allowed to show up at and didn't really do. It's the only job in the world that I've ever had that I wasn't allowed to be even referred to as an employee publicly, but they thought of it. So they had rules that I was supposed to follow. I obviously didn't follow those because I went on and did a bunch of interviews and talked about what the FBI's done wrong. So I've been told by some pretty credible people that the DOJ is looking into me for a criminal prosecution, specifically obstruction of justice. And so I don't know whether that has to do with what I've said about the pipe bomber, because I've gone pretty public about that. I think America had a right to know that there was more to the story, or if it's about this Project Veritas video. But either way, if we interrupted the FBI doing a job that was either illegal, immoral, or unethical, like, I'm willing to take those consequences. I just don't think there's actually supposed to be any in a free society.
Why do you think that they want you to know, right? Because people are trying to say, Kyle, oh, make sure he knows that for the next 3 years or so, he's going to be under the gun. Why do you think they want you to know that they're going to be coming after you?
So the person that came and spoke to me is what I would call a friendly. There's a lot of people inside of federal service that are essentially capped by, there's an ideology that is managing, and then there's the people that actually work there. And I would say overwhelmingly, the members of the FBI are either apolitical or they're conservative, especially the gun carriers, like the agents that we think of. But the analytical staff and the management are a totally different animal. So there are people that are sort of hostage in their own job. And so they know that there's a problem and that this shouldn't happen. So they're telling me to be careful. I've had this sort of messaging. I've had a lot of retired agents that have kind of said the same thing. It's like, look, they're not going to let this go. We're not done with this story. So I'm on guard for the next couple of years. I hope that they do the right thing, but we've seen what they've done to people like Steve Baker, who's become a friend, and I don't have a lot of faith in that organization to do things, in a legal, moral, or ethical way.
So, I mean, this article starts out saying they've opened a grand jury investigation on you.
Correct.
And so what are you doing to defend yourself now or to strike back?
So we retain counsel. I mean, that's what you have to do, right? We're actually countersuing the FBI, which is kind of funny. Or we're actually doing a lawsuit that has actually survived the motion to dismiss. A federal judge in Texas evaluated my claims of what's called constructive termination, which is to say they took away everything except the fact that I worked there. They took away the gun and the paycheck and so on. And that actually survived the motion to dismiss. They've also said that we can proceed forward with claims of religious discrimination. So we're accounting, going after them in the civil way. But on top of that, I just keep speaking out because the only way that I know to do this is just to be loud and to say what's true. And I'll let the chips fall where they may.
You talk about religious discrimination?
Yes, sir. So I made an allegation that the FBI's COVID mandate, which came down from the Biden administration, but it went out federal-wide. I actually wrote a letter in November of 2021 saying that it's probably unlawful, that I wasn't going to take it under any circumstances, and I wasn't negotiating on whether or not I was going to get the COVID shots, but moreover, I also wasn't going to do something that would mark me specifically for my religious beliefs. The FBI created this very discriminatory testing policy. We already knew by the end of 21 that COVID could be transmitted to people that had the shots or not, right? Everybody knew that. And the Bureau said, if you didn't get the shots because you're filthy and you need to be identified, we need you to go and upload a negative COVID test every 72 hours, which functionally meant, because of the turnaround time, you basically were testing every 48 hours. Now, I was a card-carrying paramedic for over a decade. I had a top-secret security clearance, and I said, if you can't trust me to stay at home with a box of Kleenex when I've got all this leave in my federal bank, then I can't have my top-secret clearance. And it turns out they actually took me up on the offer. But that is fairly discriminatory because only essentially unvaccinated Christians were the ones that were being targeted. And I wasn't going to participate in self-discrimination.
Tell us a little bit about the signal group that you guys had going on and in the different ways that they tried to deal with you guys individually.
So the FBI is not a monolith, and it's worth knowing that. There is a headquarters building, and that's in Washington, D.C. There's a field office in Washington, D.C., and then there are 55 other divisions that are called field offices. And what we found out is that every person that decided not to get the COVID shots felt like they were an island. They were the only person doing this. They were the only one in their squad or in their division that was in that situation. And so what I realized is that I could do basic numbers. I also had worked as a paramedic and I'd worked in an emergency room. I know how medical decisions work. And there had to be roughly 10% of the FBI that said, I'm not going to do this. So I was looking for 3,000 people and making sure that we could connect those dots so that we didn't all feel alone. And so I did. I reached out to people in Washington Field. I had them connect with the people that they knew. And word of mouth basically just went around saying, you can join this. It was an invite-only group. We assumed that the FBI, probably in the security division or insider threat, was watching us. But everything we were doing was simply backing up each other and saying, we are going to discuss policy. There was nothing classified. It was all based on what is our agency doing to us, and are they allowed to, and can we at least support each other when they do?
You were actually assigned to the Washington field office on January 6th.
Correct.
And as a result of that, you ended up being assigned to a particular case that has been a particular interest of Blaze Media for the last several months, and that is the pipe bomb story. You were put on a surveillance team, or were leading a surveillance team into the investigation of who that pipe bomber was. But during that process, and this is what we want to know, because this was part of your whistleblowing activities, what did you tell the American people?
So
about
first of
that
all,
bomb?
I actually went to Congress with this. That's how you become a whistleblower. You have to go through an approved pathway. I've also subsequently spoken about it pretty publicly since I've left the Bureau. And the story is that what we were briefed on in the days after January 6, 2021 was not what the American people was being told in a big way. First of all, they said they had no credible subjects and nowhere to start. That made no sense to us because we were sitting on a house of an address that was tied to a license plate. That person's license plate was also associated with a credit card that bought a Metro card. And apparently that Metro card was the one that was used by the person that was traced through the Washington, D.C. area until they left D.C. and went to Northern Virginia on the night before when the pipe bombs were placed. So we were told, and it's pretty credible when you're in a surveillance space, that's a slam dunk for a place to start. That doesn't mean that person placed the bombs, but if you lent your car out to somebody and 3 days later I ask you who borrowed your car 3 nights ago, the odds are you're going to give me a place to start. And so we were on that person. We were also told, because of agent safety, I asked them specifically, were these devices viable? Were they possible explosives, or were these looking, something that would scare us but didn't actually do the job? And the words that I remember, and I could be a little bit wrong, but I recall being told they looked very bomb-like, which is not the thing that the American people have been told. They've been told these were viable devices. And so assume that they were viable. We're talking about the single most terroristic act that happened on that day, right? And we have no one responsible for it. Why are they not turning over heaven and earth to find out who the person is that arbitrarily leaves bombs that could blow up anywhere in the middle of our nation's capital? That's a big problem for me. And then amusingly, my name was actually called into the testimony that went on with the former assistant director of the Washington field office, and Thomas Massey when they were doing these depositions. So I didn't know that until much later, but it's funny to find out that what I'm saying is actually registering with FBI management as well.
And you were also dealing with the FBI targeting Catholics in Virginia.
Also correct.
What can you tell us about that?
So at that point in time, this was in February of 2023. I'd already been out of the FBI. I officially allegedly resigned in April, if you want to believe that, of 2023. But before that resignation happens, I had a whistleblower reach out to me and said, look, I need a route to Congress and I need them to have this information. And what we found out is that there's some really scary stuff going on in the Richmond field office. They've written an intelligence product about what they call domain awareness. And they essentially said that there are some mitigation possibilities of introducing sources into the Catholic Church. Now, what's really important is that person was not a practicing Catholic like I am, and I'm not like a traditional Latin Mass guy because I can't find them. But he realized that the problem of the government getting involved in First Amendment protected activities are significant. And so he said, look, we've got to know about this. I ended up writing an expose story on it. Obviously, many people have heard this. I went on Tucker Carlson's and talked about it to the nation. But the real problem is the FBI cannot adjudicate what is and what is not an appropriate or radical Catholic or Baptist or evangelical denomination. You take your pick. The FBI has to remain agnostic about all religion or no religion. It just can't weigh in. And so this person saw that. And for his trouble, he actually ended up being walked out of the office unceremoniously after 27 years of honorable service within the Bureau, which should shock people because it tells you exactly what they're willing to do to the people that work there. So anybody that has faith in the FBI, just look at how they treat their own people, which is what we all think about. And you just go, man, they'll do that to anybody. And Steve's a great example.